Welcome to episode 77 of the Headspace and Timing Podcast, a show brought to you by the Change Your POV Podcast Network. Today, we're talking to another veteran who's become a clinical mental health counselor, John Kilpatrick. John and his team have established an organization called Veterans Recovery Resources in Mobile, Alabama, and, like me, is looking to make a difference in the way that we think and talk about veteran mental health.
Oftentimes, we separate the mental health from the physical health. And the spiritual health and the social health and the financial health, and you can't separate it. It's all part of we call it kind of a 360 view of the whole health, and you really can't separate it out because, especially for veterans, but it's really true for everyone. I don't have chronic pain in isolation. I have chronic pain in the midst of a post-traumatic event, or I have chronic pain in the midst of an addiction. It all happens simultaneously, and if we don't take that whole person approach, we get kind of sidetracked.
Welcome to the Change Your POV Podcast Network. You're listening to Headspace and Timing, a show dedicated to breaking down the stereotypes about veteran mental health. My name's Dwayne France, and I'm a combat veteran of both Iraq and Afghanistan. After I retired from the Army, I took on a new mission as a clinical mental health counselor for my fellow service members. If you served in any branch of the military, you're familiar with the M2 machine gun, the 50 cal. It's one of the most effective weapons in the military's arsenal. If the weapon's headspace and timing wasn't set right, however, it was just a huge useless chunk of metal. Veterans can be rendered inoperable if their headspace and timing isn't set correctly either. That's my goal with this show, to change the way that we think and talk about veteran mental health and reduce the stigma against seeking support. Each week, we'll talk with mental health professionals, veterans, and those who support veterans, service members, and their families. We're going to have real and honest conversations about a topic that most just don't like to talk about, veteran mental health. Let's jump into this week's conversation. From what I understand is the University of South Alabama, that's where Joseph was, and that was really where the Veterans Recovery Resources started?
So I started it, and then Joe was, I think, maybe about the third person I spoke to about it. And Joe's position at the University of South Alabama is what kind of got us together. And now we've got a clinical team together that includes several of the faculty at the University of South Alabama, as well as many others, some graduates, and then we've got a couple of social workers who are graduates of the University of Alabama, and then we actually have one of Joe's PhD candidates is doing an assistantship with us this fall, and then we've got plans for similar interns, assistantships in physical therapy, the physician assistant program, and also the occupational therapy program at the University of South Alabama.
But
we'll also host, we'll do field placement for social workers from the University of Alabama.
But it is not affiliated with the University of South Alabama.
No, we are not affiliated with any other organization. We certainly got a lot of good community relationships, but we don't have any formal affiliation with anyone.
This is what I'm starting to see, really, is things emerging into really four different spaces. University clinics, like Rush has one, and we have one here in University of Colorado Springs, that are specific veteran clinics that are embedded in a university. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Cohen and Headstrong and the big foundational organizations, but then organizations like yours and mine that are independent, but independent in the community with the community connections. And I think it's important because, honestly, I don't think that we have the voice that we should have when it comes to talking about mental health in the community, because it's being drowned out.
Yeah, that's a great point that you make, and it's actually in our bylaws. When we formed Veterans Recovery Resources, we had those very things in mind, and so there's a couple of things that are really unique to Veterans Recovery Resources. One is that our bylaws require the majority of our board to be veterans. We also have a preference and dare say requirement for the majority of our clinical staff and all our employees to be veterans. But it's something that we can do. We can do things that the VA is can't do, but it's really not designed to do. The VA provides a fantastic service for a lot of veterans, but there's places where you have to have a community partner, and that's what we want to be. And so we are, always very quick to let folks know that while we welcome, we need relationships in the communities, we are only accountable to our board and to the veterans that we serve, and no one else. And so, if given the choice or we have to choose, we'll always choose the veterans we care for.
Right, and I absolutely agree, and I think that that's important. Is what we're doing, is that good for the veteran? But it sounds like it's as much cooperation rather than conflict. This is a lot of the discussion is people believe that community providers are diametrically opposed to the VA, but it's a collaborative effort. It's not a competitive effort.
It is absolutely a collaborative effort, and not to get too political, but our government is designed to provide services in conjunction with community partners, faith-based organization, other community services, and no governmental organization is ever going to be all things to all people. They're just not designed to do it. And like I tell folks, depending on what vision you're in and what clinic you're going to, somewhere between 85 and I'd say probably even 95% in some areas of veterans get everything they need from the VA, and it's high quality health care. But, even in the best ones, there's still that 5% that need something different. Or, I'm sure you read that recent study the VA published, I think towards the end of last year, where the two major barriers to veterans seeking care in the VA, number one was the VA, and number two was the veteran.
Right.
And, so there's got to be an alternative for those who either don't want to or can't seek care in the VA. And so I think we're headed in the right direction with VA Choice and expanding that so that folks can, get a timely appointment. And for us, it's more about location. And so, if you have a mental health issue that requires residential treatment, your chances of long-term recovery go up considerably if you can get that treatment where you live. So when we send somebody out of town for treatment, towards the end of any good residential treatment, those folks are going to start going out in the community and start connecting at 12-step groups and other community resources, and to me it's counterproductive to get those connections in a community towards the end of your treatment, and then you move back home and you don't have any of those connections.
That brings up. So,
like for us, go ahead.
No, that brings up something that a stone that just dropped into my mind is one of the most effective ways that we found to treat veterans with mental health concerns while we were deployed was treat them as far forward as possible. keep them with their
Absolutely.
unit, keep them with their organization, and keep them in a place where you don't remove them from something. Here in Colorado, and I've often said, there's things that the VA can't do, or things the VA can do that we can't, which is the long-term residential out here. It's in Sheridan and Grand Island and things like that. But you bring up a good point in that in the military, we found it was most effective to treat the veteran or treat the service member as far forward as possible. But we don't really do that in the post-military treatment.
No, that's exactly right. And it's funny you say that, because I was actually in charge of that in my last deployment, working in Kuwait and managing healthcare for CENTCOM. I mean, we were regularly, I'm talking about weekly rotations, sending behavioral health folks forward. I'm talking about as far forward as you could get them to the FOBs up in Iraq and Afghanistan, to start that mental health discussion. And we have so many veterans, especially in our rural areas here in Alabama, where, it's 100 miles to the nearest VA clinic, and we've got to figure out a way, just like you said, to get that health care and that mental health care as far forward as we can, because you really have to, for long-term success, you've got to find recovery at home, and you've got to find a community of folks, to support you and that you can support where you live, and that's so. But again, it's not the VA's problem to solve. It's our problem to solve. It's us, those of us in recovery. But we can work together with the VA where, say we get a veteran that goes through the residential program in Biloxi, which is about 60 miles away for us. If we can coordinate with the VA and that guy lives, in the Mobile area or South Alabama, we can coordinate his aftercare. So that he gets treatment at the VA and then gets connected with our community recovery, our recovery community here. That's a win-win.
And I think this kind of collaborative and cooperative approach is ultimately better for the veteran. And again, not competitive, not like organizations like yours or mine or anyone else's individually or collectively could supplant the VA. That's not possible. But I work very closely with our local Veterans Court here in Colorado Springs, and it's really a model for cross-organizational cooperation. You have the state folks in the judicial branch, you have local nonprofits, you have local organizations, companies like mine, like the one that I work for, and then you have the VA. So you have all of these people that, if people would believe that you wouldn't be able to get along, but it does work very well because it's a collaborative effort, and like you said, it's for the focus of the veteran.
Yeah, and we're that's one of the things that we did, that we've done here, and to be honest, before anybody even knew what we were doing, we spent 2 years developing those relationships. And so like the peer support symposium we hosted recently, we had strong attendance from the VA. We had folks coming from the VA around the country, here to South Alabama, all talking about the same things. The way we employ peer support in our organization is a little different than what the VA does, but we can draw on experience of folks like, Bob Curry up at Dry Hooch. We had him down for the symposium. We had some peer support folks out of New York. We had some out of Texas come and present. And then some of our own, research being done right here at the University of South Alabama. We had Dr. David Albright come down from the University of Alabama and talk about mental health and the opioid crisis and how important peer support is. And by design, peer support is a local. It has to be local, and so the way we develop our peers it has to be in conjunction with all of the other services out there. That means, like you said, state, local government, the VA, the prison systems, the state courts, federal courts. We've got to all work together. I mean, it's designed to work that way.
So I'd like to hear a little bit more about the Peer Support Symposium. Now, people are joining us sort of in the middle of the conversation. So Veterans Recovery Resources is a bunch of different things, but primarily it is a clinic, a mental health clinic, an outpatient mental health clinic for veterans to be able to receive mental health treatment. But you just hosted, I assume it's going to be your first annual. It was the first Peer Support Symposium that you put together and that your organization hosted. So I guess if you could tell us a little bit more about how the Peer Support Symposium came about and sort of maybe some of the results you got from that.
Sure. So it came out of a grant, actually. So as I told you, I finished my master's degree in social work last May. But we were awarded from the University of Alabama their 2017 Outstanding Student-Led Community Engagement. And that came with a small financial grant with a lot of restrictions on how to spend it. And so one of the things that we really wanted to do was, and what we've been working on for the last year or so, is trying to get kind of the best practices in peer support from all the various programs to kind of, everything we do at Veterans Recovery, we call it the Veterans Recovery Way. And so, we like to see what's working elsewhere, talk to the people who know, find the experts, get to the bottom of it, and through collaboration and cooperation and sharing ideas, come up with kind of the best practices. And so the Peer Support Symposium was designed to do just that. And what we were able to do was, we far exceeded our expectations, and just the number of folks that attended. It was the facility. We hosted it out at the University of South Alabama Faculty Club, and we were at capacity. And we had such a wide range of folks in attendance. So about, I think, probably 60-70% of them veterans. And we had folks from, PhDs to peer support to just veterans, in the community that just wanted to come and hear about it. But what came out of that was, you go to these day-long conferences and you might hear one or two good presenters. And this thing was just, literally, I was exhausted by the end of the day because there was not one presentation given that you could zone out on because they were all so relevant.
Nobody's looking at their phones.
Nobody was looking at their phone. Everybody was engaged. There was always questions. And then probably one of the best parts of the program for me was we had a panel discussion where we invited folks who are actively engaged in peer support in a variety of settings, share and kind of take questions from a moderator. Dr. Courier served as the moderator, and then we had questions from the audience. And a couple of those guys were VA peer support specialists with a lot of credentials, a lot of training. And then we had some folks out of the nonprofit world, and some folks from academia, and just a wealth of knowledge, great sharing, great contacts, and just really continuing our mission here at Veterans Recovery to just build that recovery community, and we think that that's going to be best done by creating a bunch of highly motivated, very well-trained peer support specialists.
No, I absolutely agree. I think that, especially when it comes to veteran mental health, that a non-clinical, not at the level of mental health, clinical mental health counselor like you and I are at, or definitely like Dr. Courier, but someone that has more than just a basic understanding of depression and PTSD. And so there's this gap between what everybody thinks they know and then the clinical space. And for veterans especially, the peer support is significant. I talked about this back in episode 39 with my buddy Bennett Tanton, who is a peer support specialist out of upstate New York, who he had heard about the symposium, wasn't actually able to go, wasn't able to get down there, and that sort of goes to the buzz that you were already creating even before, that there were VA peer support specialists that wanted to attend that weren't able to do so, but that critical piece of somebody that it's cultural, right? But they already know the culture. Like you and I, we served in the military, and so we're sort of quote unquote super peers, where we have that sort of lived cultural competence. And I think there are a lot of veterans who have the lived cultural competence that if we were just able to provide them the understanding, they don't need to know everything about mental health that you and I know and the DSM and diagnosis and all that. But if we can teach veterans who are interested and who want to support their fellow service members, if we can teach them the basics about veteran mental health and mental wellness, then that's going to make everybody's job a whole heck of a lot easier.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that came out of our peer support, the peer support symposium that we had, was the discussion on suicide was just phenomenal. And, even for somebody, 32 years in the military, you've had a little bit of suicide prevention training. And, but one of the things that came out of the presentation we had was the notion that, suicide ideation and somebody deciding to take suicide as an option, it doesn't happen quickly. There's a slow ramp up, and then they're in that crisis period or above that red line where it's possible, it's feasible, they have the means and a plan. That period of time is very short. And that's where I think, in fighting the suicide epidemic, where peers can absolutely be trained to help that veteran get through that very short period of time. It's typically hours that period of time lasts where, someone who has a suicidal ideation actually has the means and could actually carry it out. But the research also shows that if we can get them past that period, back under that red line, that the recovery can come very quickly. And so I think that's something that came out of the peer support symposium for me that is absolutely, I think, within the wheelhouse of a well-trained peer specialist.
Sure, and even in that space, in that slow ramp up before they get to that red line, as you describe it, say that's a 3% grade, going up, and it's a very long, gradual slope up, where a trained peer support specialist will be able to see those things sooner and catch it perhaps even before it gets up to the red line, and avoid that crisis moment altogether. And I think that it really is going to be critical of changing the way that we think and talk about veteran mental health is by educating more of yours and mine, fellow service members about mental health, and that it's not something to shy away from. It's not a last resort. It's something that's as common as diabetes or that bum knee that I have, there's treatment for the mental health concerns just as much as there is for the diabetes or my knee.
That's right, and any good peer support training, in the Army, I know you know this, but we talk about that performance triad where we talk about what we eat, getting good sleep, and rest. And that all comes out of that GAT tool that they developed a while back, that global assessment tool. And that's the approach I think that we need, because it's, we oftentimes we separate the mental health from the physical health, and the spiritual health, and the social health, and the financial health, and you can't separate it. It's all part of we call it kind of a 360 view of the whole health, and you really can't separate it out, because, especially for veterans, but it's really true for everyone. I don't have chronic pain in isolation. I have chronic pain in the midst of a post-traumatic event, or I have chronic pain in the midst of an addiction. It all happens simultaneously, and if we don't take that whole person approach, we get kind of sidetracked, and I think that's what we've done, and why we are where we are, where it's perfectly fine for me to go to the doctor and get medicine for my back pain, but there's some stigma about talking about this traumatic event that I went through that's causing me to stay up all night.
Sure, and we're even...
And we've got to get that mental health and physical health all back in one place. We've got to get it all together, because it's so related.
And so that's something that you had mentioned earlier, of what you're trying to do with Veterans Recovery Resources, about bringing in not just mental health professionals, but also physical health professionals. But before we get to that, I think I'd like to hear a little bit about how Veterans Recovery Resources started. I know that as you and I talked before we started recording, that I first heard about it from Dr. Joseph Currier, who longtime listeners will know we had back on episode 33 talking about moral injury. But Dr. Currier was very excited to tell me about what you were doing, even back that far. So maybe start with a story of how Veterans Recovery Resources came about, and then what your vision for the organization is.
Sure. Well, it's a long story, unfortunately, but one that's kind of coming to fruition, and I'll try to get through it as quickly as I can. So I struggled personally after my deployment from Desert Storm, and struggled with alcohol, and just couldn't quite get it, and finally got some help, and I got sober in 1996. And about that time, I got out of the Marine Corps Reserve and finished college, and just kind of went inactive. And about 1998, decided to go back into the Army and get my commission. And so I finished officer candidate school and became a medical service corps officer. And I went out to Fort Sam Houston for my officer basic course. And I had been in recovery for a year or two, and I thought that I would find other soldiers in recovery. On a big base like Fort Sam Houston, you would think there'd be some folks talking about staying sober, and I couldn't find them anywhere. And that was the first notion that I had, that there had to be a way to connect soldiers and veterans in recovery with each other. Because those of us in long-term recovery, even short-term recovery, we know we cannot do it alone, and we've got to find other folks to help us in the fight. And so that was the spark, I guess. And I just got busy with life and didn't do anything with it. And I found exactly the same thing when I deployed to Kosovo in 2004. Was able to start some 12-step meetings, and was able to get some support from the chaplains and behavioral health folks to let folks know, hey, I'm here, I'm in recovery if anybody wants to talk. And didn't do much else with it after that. And then in 2009, I got mobilized again, and this time I got sent to the Pentagon, and I worked for the Surgeon General of the Army. And I thought for sure, I would be able to find a 12-step group and some other folks in recovery in D.C. at the Pentagon, and there was nothing there. And so I, went out in town and found out where they were, and found a couple of other folks that worked there, and we started a meeting, and kind of got a meeting going there, and then that's where I'm like, this has really got to change. And then I think the thing that really did it for me, because at this point the only experience I had was my own. I had no clinical background. I really didn't know anything about the science of it. I only knew what I had to do for my own recovery. And so I worked in operations for the Surgeon General, and I got tasked to write the operations order to expand the Army Confidential Alcohol Treatment Program. And I started reading through this program, and it was completely clinical. And so the Army's approach was, you could report that you have a problem, and you would get into this confidential treatment protocol that kind of kept it off your record. So they were trying to address the stigmas, which was good. But the Army's approach was, you got to see this provider for 3 appointments, and you got 4 appointments with this guy and 2 appointments with this guy, and you were cured. And you just went back to work. And we didn't talk about this again. And I told some of the leading psychiatrists and folks this is not going to work, because that might get you sober for a little while, but unless you find some other folks on the same journey, you're not going to stay sober long. And that was really the final thing for me. And so I finished that tour in 2010. Again, got home, got busy with life, but it just wouldn't go away. And so I mentioned the idea to somebody, I guess it would have been about 2014, and that guy was a friend of Joe Courier's. And I will never forget the day Joe Courier and I met for lunch, and I told him what I thought, and he said, "We got to do it." And so we set out to do it, and we're about 3.5 years into it.
So, and even that much, I really appreciate just the honesty of the story, and that's critical, even in recovery, is being open about what we're dealing with. It doesn't surprise me, of course, that those were the experiences, but really coming from that background, from a recovery background, and seeing how important peer-to-peer, that's what AA is about, or any of the other recovery programs are about, is that peer support, not a peer support specialist like the VA, but just support from others who have experienced that. And so the ability for you to bridge that gap between my military service that needs the peer aspect of it, because that's, the buddy team is what we're all about, but also how critical peer-to-peer support was in your own recovery, and seeing that KTEP program with new eyes, with the eyes of someone who potentially would have taken care of it. I think back when, and I joined the Army in '92, so about the same time as you, and it was, whatever was before ASAP, right? But it was just, that was the place that no one wanted to go. And it was always just this avoidant thing. So you got together with Joe Courier, and you started coming up with it. It's not just an addiction program that you have; it's comprehensive mental health, more than just addiction treatment that you're doing at Veterans Recovery Resources. So going from the story where it became to where you're at now, and then where you see it going in the future.
Yeah, so what we know, again, because we've lived it, is that very few of us with alcohol and drug problems have, that's the only problem. There's always something more. And so, as just in my own personal work, not in any kind of clinical capacity, just in my own recovery work, working with other alcoholics and other folks, I just started to see some trends, and it boiled down to just, some really unhealthy approaches to life, and it's there's lots of studies to kind of tell us where it started or how it started, and that's somewhat irrelevant in our approach, because if you're addicted to opiates because you took them for your back pain, you're still a drug addict, but you still got back pain, and so you just can't treat one in isolation. And so again, it just came out of my own personal experience of struggling with post-combat stress and those moral injuries that Dr. Currier talks about, and then trying to drink some of that stuff away, and then that compounds the problem, and then you've got the 30 years of jumping out of airplanes and doing all the things we do to beat our bodies up physically, and I'm not special. I mean, there's a lot of us who come out of military service with real physical pain, real emotional pain, real moral injury, and that manifests itself in any number of ways. And so for me, I was very fortunate to get treatment from some folks who had a kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to mental health. And what I mean by that was it really didn't matter what your symptom was. So if it manifested as alcoholism or drug addiction or sex addiction or any other ism, the problem was always the same, and the solution was the same. And the problem was that we were disconnected, from God and from other people. And the solution is always getting connected. And that's seems to be the approach, but you've got to address all those other issues to get there, to get connected. And so, talking about where we want to go, our mission, and we took months literally developing our mission statement, because it seemed that there were any number of things keeping veterans from healing. And so so our mission is to remove those barriers. And so that could be not having VA benefits, not having insurance. It could be thinking that I'm going to lose my job. It could be convincing our spouse that they need treatment. Getting to an appointment, having something local so I don't have to take off from work a whole day for a 1-hour appointment. And so we've kind of set out to find the barriers that keep folks from healing, and try to just like we do in the military, we come to an obstacle. We're either going to go through it, go over it, go around it, or blow it up. And that's our approach.
Yeah, if only we could apply to debt core to some of that stigma out there, that might break it open.
Well, again, I mean that's a barrier. You're exactly right. I mean, we've got just education. I just spoke to a military spouse just this afternoon, and her spouse is really struggling, and she said he told me he just wants to sit in a room with other people like him who can tell him he's not crazy. And you talk about that all the time. It's not crazy, and he is just like the rest of us, and we all struggle in different ways, but that's such a huge part of my own personal recovery, is knowing that I'm not special and I'm not the only one that feels this way. And when I can share honestly with another veteran about my experience and get that kind of right back to me, that opens up the door for us to have a real meaningful conversation. And out of that real meaningful conversation, we have a connection. And now we're kind of bound to each other. And, we're not going to let each other fail.
Yeah, and I think the trick,
where the money's at for me.
It is, absolutely. I think the trick is, how do we get the veteran to come into that room, to decide that I am going to open up rather than staying in this disconnected place that you talked about. What you were talking about earlier is the two biggest barriers for veterans receiving treatment from the VA. One was the VA, and some of the, you and I both, are members of receiving services. I was on the phone this afternoon for 35 minutes trying to coordinate a VA appointment. But it's not the VA, it's the veteran themselves, which is the barrier. And this is what I found really over the last 4 years since I've been doing this, is we can provide all of the resources. You can open up veterans recovery resources in Mobile, and we could do things in Orlando, in Chicago, in Colorado Springs. But yet the veteran is still not accessing services at the rate that they should. And I really do feel that there's a need to be able to, like you said, educate and sort of get the information out there, because even if you and I are doing this work, you're a clinician, I'm a clinician. We love the work that we're doing, but we would love to be able to. I'm sure there's a dock somewhere on the Gulf of Mexico with your name on it, and I'd love to be in the mountains, 90% of my time. But we know that veterans aren't accessing the resources the way that they should. So how do you think that we can really get that information out to the veterans, or even the veterans' spouses or family members?
Well, it's, shows just like this. I mean, your book, your podcast, getting the word out. A lot of us are still serving, and we can talk about it at our unit. We do a tremendous amount of community outreach here at Veterans Recovery. We've actually, developed a speakers bureau, for lack of a better word, to kind of multiply me. So I'm not the one always talking, but we are ingrained in the veteran community here in Mobile. So we have someone from Veterans Recovery is a member of, we're members of just about every veteran service organization there is. So, we've got members in the VFW, the American Legion, the Disabled American Vets. One of the things that we have down here in South Alabama, which I think has become a kind of a model community for the VA, is we have I don't even know what you call it, but it's kind of a coalition of veterans service organizations and truly any business or organization who wants to serve veterans. It's called the South Alabama Veterans Council. They meet once a month. They have no money. They give no money. They need no money. But it's led by folks who are accountable to no one but themselves and the veterans they serve. And truly anyone with something to say or something to offer to our veteran community has a forum. And they put out a newsletter, and we have representation from, the Buffalo soldiers, the Vietnam vets, the Korean vets. Unfortunately, we've lost most of our World War II vets, but they were there when they were living, and so everybody in the veteran community here has a voice and a platform, and the information is put out in newsletters and shared, across the VA and just about every organization a veteran might go for help, and so we spent a good 2 years. Making sure that we knew where we fit in that community of care, and more importantly, we identified some of the gaps, and we asked a lot of people, what the gaps were, and that's how we got to identifying the urgent need for residential care, because there's just a huge gap. We have 64,000 veterans in South Alabama, and 20 beds at the VA for residential treatment. And, you can do the math from any study you want, and 20 beds is not enough.
Right. No, I mean, and that's but I really like the idea that you have. Of course, all the communities I'm involved, I attend more meetings than I guess I particularly want to, as I'm sure that you do too. But it's all about us clinicians, mental health professionals, getting out of our offices and into the community, and really demystifying some of the wizardry sort of that we do. And making it normal, because if we sit over here and all the veterans are over there, then the gap is never going to get closed. And so it sounds like getting that outreach piece and having, people who are talking about veteran mental health out in the community. You're right. It would be much more effective, both in the short term and in the long run, to really change the conversation.
Absolutely, and we use everything we can find. Like, for instance, one of our clinical folks is also a professor at the University of South Alabama, and he serves as the faculty advisor for the Student Veteran Association. And then there's veterans who come back who are alumni of the university, and they've put a group together, just to do service. And so just last month or so, we had the Student Veteran Association at the university put together a cleanup day at a local park, and it just happened to be we call it Medal of Honor Park, and it's after Medal of Honor recipients from our state. And we were able to partner with them. We got the businesses involved, donating things. We got our county government involved. We got city government involved, and just had a great time and had a big barbecue and, building community by serving the community. And, that's what it takes. That's what it's going to take, I think, to change the conversation, is, like you said, we got to get out in the community. It's our problem to solve.
It is, and as my colleague, our colleague, Tony Williams, who has a similar organization in Orlando, is fond of saying that it is a national problem, but it has a local solution. What would work here in Colorado Springs likely wouldn't work in South Alabama, or New York, for that example. And so it does take each of us engaging with the community and taking what we know and taking the information that we have and providing support. So that's great. I am going to make sure that the link to the South Alabama Veterans Council, as well as the Veterans Recovery Resources, are in the show notes. Anything else you think you'd like to share with the audience before we kick off?
Well, like I said, you really just summed it up for us. It is a national problem, and it requires a local solution. And so, we intend for this Veterans Recovery Resources Treatment Facility in Mobile to be the first of many. And so we've laid the groundwork, we've got the infrastructure in place, and we intend to build. We'd like to build about 50 of these, because there's not a community of veterans that have enough inpatient treatment. And so we've already talked to folks in Atlanta, some folks out in Phoenix and Houston. Like you said, it's a national problem, but it's one that's got to be resolved at the local level, and that means community involvement. And so the first phase of our capital campaign was all local, and so This is a community problem, and it's you see it manifest in our jails, in our prisons, in our social services. It's taxing on our community, and so we've presented Veterans Recovery Resources as not only a solution for veterans mental health care, but it's an economic development. project, because we know that healthy, thriving veterans make some of the best employees in the world. And we've got hundreds of jobs here in Mobile, Alabama that are unfilled, that any one good veteran could fill. And if we can get them on the other side of the mental health crisis, these guys become and girls become, healthy, productive citizens. We work hard. We participate at church. We coach Little League. We do all of those community engagement things very well. We've just got to get the war behind us and start living.
No, absolutely, and I couldn't have said it better myself. So if somebody would like to reach out, maybe they're working with an organization that would like to partner with Veterans Recovery or anything like that, how can they find you or the organization, website, social media, things like that?
Yeah, so the website is vetsrecover.org, vetsrecover.org. And everything that we have or you would like to know about us is available on the website, including links to our Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, plus our toll-free number. And so you can always click the Contact Us button there and send a note, and several folks in our organization will get it, and you will get a response. And then just as importantly, you can click the Donate Now button. So we are still in phase 2 of our capital campaign, and we've got about $2 million to raise to renovate a 17,000 square foot facility in an old historic school that we've purchased. And so we need resources. We need cash mostly, and we will have our outpatient clinic open this month, and it's all on the same property, and you can see all of that on our website, vetsrecover.org.
That's great. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to share with the audience, and hopefully this will continue to add to the conversation and make a difference.
All right, man. We look forward to getting you down here in South Alabama. We caught a mess load of big redfish this weekend and about 24 trout, and they're big, nice speckled trout. So come on down to South Alabama, and we'll take you fishing.
We'll see. I think the humidity might be too much for me. I'm a Colorado mountain guy. So you're listening to Headspace and Timing on the Change Your POV podcast network. As you can see, John and I can go on about this all day. The approach to veteran mental health that Veterans Recovery Resources is taking is one of connection and collaboration. You heard John talk about peer support, the concept of total wellness, and the need to make a discussion about veteran mental health a community conversation and not just a clinical conversation. We've talked about peer support before on the podcast, back at the beginning of the year with Bennett Tanton. John talks here about how some programs are just straight clinical, like prescribing therapy, like prescribing medications. Take 2 sessions and call me in the morning. Therapy, and medication for that matter, is very effective, but it's not everything. In my personal opinion, any program that works with veterans needs a component of peer-to-peer connection. It works in many different areas in life, and it works great when it comes to veteran mental health. We also talked about total wellness, what John called 360-degree person concept. Whatever you call it, it's about finding balance, not just in mental health, which includes our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, but also our spiritual health, the purpose that we find in our higher power. For me, it's my faith in Christ, but if that spiritual component is missing in life, then something very important is missing. We also need to focus on physical wellness, financial wellness, social wellness by finding balance, not too much or too little. In each of these areas, we're going to be more effective and pleased in our post-military lives. And having a community conversation. There are many in the veteran support community who think that all we need to do to help the veteran is give them help with whatever it is that we do. If I'm an employment specialist, then we help get the veteran a job. If I'm a housing specialist, then I help the veteran get a place to live. sobriety, financial stability, mental health counseling. If all of us think that our solution is the only one the veteran needs, then we're serving ourselves, not the needs of the veteran and their family. It's only through community collaboration and connection that we're actually able to change the way that we think and talk about total wellness. I do have to send out a huge thanks to Veterans Recovery Resources, and in particular a member of their board of directors, Amanda Hayes. Veterans Recovery Resources purchased copies of Combat Vet Don't Mean Crazy for each of the attendees of their symposium, and I've been receiving a lot of great feedback about it. Anytime we're able to get the message out about veteran mental health and wellness, it's amazing. That's what we're trying to do here at Headspace and Timing, bring you as much information as we can about that one aspect of total wellness, veteran mental health. If you want to keep up with us, you can get the latest blog posts and podcasts delivered to Facebook Messenger, which will make it easier for you to listen, learn, and share with those you care about. Go to veteranmentalhealth.com, and in the middle of the picture, there's a big orange button. Click that and let me do the rest. It's that simple. Next week, we're going to continue talking to folks in Southern Alabama, Dr. Philip Smith and Nick Fedor. Nick presented at the Veterans Recovery Resources Peer Support Symposium, and Dr. Smith is participating in Operation Deep Dive, a multi-site community-based study on the environmental factors of veteran suicide. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it, and until then, stay focused and be well. I'd like to thank the Change Your POV Podcast Network for hosting this show and highlighting the critical importance of veteran mental health. We want to hear from you. You can reach out to me via email at dwayne@veteranmentalhealth.com. You can find me at Twitter at @TheCounselingVet, or head on over to Facebook and look for the Change Your POV Squad. You can find the show notes for this episode and all the episodes by going to veteranmentalhealth.com or changeyourpov.com. Sign up for updates on either or both so you don't miss another episode. While you're at it, check out the other great shows on the Change Your POV Podcast Network. The show about remembering our military history and reviving our warrior spirit, Changing Hearts and Minds. The show about outdoor activities that us veterans love so much, Neophyte in the Woods. The show that helps us get going at the beginning of the week, Motivation Monday. And Attack Fridays, the show that brings you actionable tips, tricks, and coachable knowledge to help you make the best of your transition. While you're checking out the other shows, drop us a review in iTunes or whatever podcast platform you're listening to. The reviews really help spread the word about what we're doing. If you're looking for the total package for all the information you need to live the life you want after leaving the military, you found it. If you know of a buddy who's looking for the same info, share it with them so they can find it too. I want to thank Doc Todd for his permission to use his track Not Alone from his amazing album Combat Medicine. Doc Todd is somebody who's trying to bring veteran mental health out of the darkness and into the light, and you can get the album by going to therealdoctodd.com. Check it out. Because remember, veterans, you're not alone. Ever.
The struggle is real, found a feast and lost a soul. Eventually my drinking, it got out of control. There in darkness I roam, struggling to find home. See, suddenly death didn't feel so alone. 22 a day, destination unknown. It could have been avoided if you picked up the phone, but now you're gone, so I guess all we get is the tone. Nothing but bone weeds, overgrown, pushing up stones. I've triumphed over enemies, co-created enemies. Broke out facilities that tried to put an end to me. R.I.P. I'd rather grind in tranquility. Authentic tendency, embrace my ability.
I try so hard to have faith. I bow my head and I pray. Lord, please lend me the strength to carry on and keep staying. How this life's so demanding, so much pain, all this plenty. I hurt each time my way, but with you I'm not alone.
Not alone. You're not alone.
Ah, yeah. And every time that I fall, I'ma call on you, get myself back up again.
Without my Georgia girls, yeah, I'd probably be dead. Cause I'd be taking every med that the VA said. Gave every shred, every last thread of my identity. Conquer my fragility, eliminate the enemy. Deliver me, God, from temptation. Tell me that this life is just a matrix. Need a facelift, back to basics. Vision LASIX, I only feel alive when I hear the bass kick.
Oh, I try so hard to have faith. I bow my head and I pray. Lord, please lend me the strength to carry on and keep staying.
Stand up.
How this life's so demanding, so much pain, all this plenty. I hurt each time my way, but with you I'm not alone.
Not alone. You're not alone.
Ah, yeah. And every time that I fall, I'ma call on you, pick myself back up again.
Yeah, just pick up the phone, you're not alone. Just pick up the phone, you're not alone, man. Just pick up the phone, you're not alone. Yeah, pick up the phone, I'm right here. And I love you guys. Take those bottles out, dog, and pour them in the sink. Take the needles out your arm and the gun away from your forehead. It's time, man, you've been through enough pain, stand up. It's time to stand back up. All my veterans, man, Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard. Get up, you know.